Friends, welcome to the Teresa Lusk Show. I am so excited that you are watching today. Listen, remember that on this show, we will talk about faith, family, business, and one of my favorite topics, politics. One of the greatest things about this show is that we are here to educate you. Yes, we're passionate about the things that are going on in our state, in our local area, in our nation, but honestly, one of my greatest pleasures is to bring forth people who are going to educate you. And today I have one of the greatest pleasures. I get to introduce to you a man who is one of the strongest, most educational voices in Texas in this season. I want to tell you a little bit about Luke Macias. Luke Macias is a Texas-based political consultant who has helped elect the most conservative public servants across the state. He's worked from the local level to the statewide campaigns. He's a full spectrum conservative who only works alongside public officials who will walk the walk and not just talk the talk. Luke has been recognized as one of the most valuable consultants in Texas by Capital. So help me welcome Luke Macias.
Hey, Teresa.
Hey, Luke. Listen, I met you at a local chapter here for the conservatives. And one of the things that really grabbed me was that you were one of the most informative. You had information, education, passion for what you were teaching us about. And so I wanted to bring you on today to discuss something that's going on here. It's got a lot of Texans in an uproar because there are some unfortunate things going on, and that is the impeachment and allegations against Ken Paxton, our Attorney General. So far we know this, that there are 20 articles that included allegations of bribery, unfitness for office, and abuse of public trust, and so much more. We know now that the trial will begin by no later than August 28th. With 31 senators that have voted, I believe, they need 2/3 of the majority needed to remove him from office. So let's start talking a little bit about that. Can you give the fellow Texans a little bit of information that we need to know?
Yeah, so important context to understand when you hear the word impeachment and Texas, these things have only happened twice in Texas history, once to a statewide official and once to a district judge in the Rio Grande Valley. And so it's something that we do very rarely. It's one of the main criticisms of how it was done. How it's been done in the past is basically you have the legislature say, hey, we have concerns that rise to the level that we actually think that we should consider impeaching somebody. They vote to form a committee. They assign that committee. Everyone knows they're considering this legislatively. And then they go through the process. That process is open. It's transparent. Brian Harrison, who's a representative from Ellis County, said the impeachment process must be itself unimpeachable. And that did not happen here. Basically, what you have is a couple months ago, it seems by all accounts and by what the speaker has said, a couple months ago, he and maybe a handful of his Republican leadership and Democrat leadership circle, so Democrats and Republicans together, say, hey, we should start investigating the Attorney General. And actually, the level of concern we have of his activities is that we are going to consider impeaching him. And their calculus was pretty easy because almost every single Democrat is going to vote to impeach the Attorney General. So the speaker and a handful of his leadership team can basically deliver the Democrats the rest of the necessary votes to impeach any statewide Republican official. So they start investigating him, but they do it secretly. So secretly that the Attorney General and his office themselves did not even know they were being investigated and that impeachment was on the table. Nobody in the Senate knew. The vast majority of the Republican caucus didn't know. The vast majority of the Democrat caucus didn't know. And then about a week before the end of session, the speaker and his team says, hey, we are actually going to impeach the Attorney General. And in 44 hours, you, the Texas House, are going to vote on whether to do that or not. Now, ultimately, they knew they could do it in one of the shadiest ways possible because the votes were already baked in. They only needed a majority of the legislature, and they had the Democrat votes all but sewn up. There was only one Democrat that didn't vote for it. That Democrat's Harold Dutton. He voted present, not voting. He's the second most senior Democrat. He's been there for over 40 years, or at 40 years, actually. And he just stood up and said this whole thing is very problematic. So that's one thing to recognize. Only one statewide official ever in the history of the state of Texas in 1917. And at the time, it was a months-long process that was done in a transparent way. In this case, you have House leadership basically say, we have the Democrat votes. We need to deliver us a win. We don't need to tell anybody we're doing this. We're just going to muscle it through and throw that into the lap of the Texas Senate. The Texas Senate's doing the opposite of the House. They're actually forming a committee. They're establishing the rules by June 20th. They said they will have the trial no later than late August, as you said. It could be that they have the trial before then, and they have the ability to call themselves back in as soon as they have those rules set at a time that the Senate agrees to preside over this. So that's where we're at.
Okay, what do you suspect is going to happen, number one? And number two, what is the motive behind so much of this mess? Why come against Ken Paxton so much? Ken Paxton so much. What is going on with that?
Yeah, so the result I think we're headed to, most people think that it is very unlikely that the Senate will convict Attorney General Paxton. And part of that just even comes down to, let's take the articles themselves. Okay, so I'm going to handle this in two different ways. There's really two serious concerns I think that the public has, and I think the Senate, being a legislative body that actually is more reflective of the concerns of the public, share these same concerns. One is just the process that the House went about. If we are to establish that as precedent for how we impeach someone, we are basically telling future legislatures, we don't want the impeachment process to be rare at all. In fact, we'd like this to be on the table whenever you want, however you want, as long as 76 of you can get together and decide somebody should be impeached, overturn an election, deny the voters their right to pick their officials, throw somebody out that you don't like, some political opponent. So I think that's a big concern. The second concern I think people have is the fact that these articles are actually spanning, 20 articles spanning some that go back to when Attorney General Paxton was first running against Dan Branch in 2014 in the Republican primary. And I remember that. I was 24 years old, running a bunch of campaigns all across Texas. Dan Branch comes in and says, Ken Paxton is a criminal. Now, here's the reality. The criminal justice system doesn't deem Ken Paxton a criminal at this time. And you have Democrat district attorneys that would love to put him behind bars if they felt like they had a case. This is the same thing we're dealing with President Trump, where you have a New York City district attorney who says, I don't care what it is, I'm going to find a way to get to this guy. They're accusing him of tampering with the FBI documents. The reality is that the FBI can bring a case against Ken Paxton and have decided not to, right? That's the FBI's decision. So when all of these things come into play, the ultimate problem is that a bunch of political individuals who are not aligned, they see Ken Paxton as a political enemy of themselves in the Texas House. And there's enough Republicans who are more part of the establishment that see him as a political enemy. And those individuals do not like the decision that the voters have made. And so they've decided, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to make the decision for the voters, throw him out of office, tell him he's not allowed to be attorney general, and let our governor pick somebody else who wasn't just elected by millions of Texans. I think that's the big concern. I think the reason behind why is that you have a powerful Republican leadership team in the Texas House, and it's a shared leadership team. It's some Republicans and some Democrats. And they've decided that Ken Paxton does not align with where they want to see Texas go, and they've decided to exercise their power in this way.
Well, and that's really unfortunate, because I think you're pointing to it, and that's where I want to go next. Is I believe that there is such a battle for Texas. Texas is one of the greatest states, the greatest state, really. I'm a Texan, born and raised, so I think it's the greatest state ever. But I do think that you are onto something as you're going here, saying, there is a battle for Texas, and for the things that are being allowed to go on. It does mirror a lot of what's happened to former President Trump. We know that Paxton was easily reelected to a third term in the last election. He has challenged the Biden admin on immigration, voting, and abortion as well. Would that have anything to do with this? What do you think about that?
Well, I think the reason that Democrats would oppose him absolutely align with the fact that he's one of the most conservative attorney generals in the country, and he is by far one of the most consistent attorney generals to oppose the Biden administration's agenda and try to undermine what they're trying to accomplish. This is what we've unfortunately seen from the left. Every Republican administration, there's lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, and it's so hard to even get our policies implemented. And Ken Paxton has done that same thing against Joe Biden. That's why all but one Democrat are going to vote to impeach him. And the Democrat who's going to vote no is just present, not voting. He's clear, hey, I'm fine if he gets impeached. I'm not trying to stop it. I just hate the way this process has been done. And so I think Democrats' motivations to do that are 100% in alignment. When Republicans say, hey, we just don't like the guy, we're going to use our political muscle to get him out, I think one of the reasons you're seeing such frustration amongst the average Republican voter is that they look at this and say, this is handing Democrats a win. You're literally giving them a scalp just for your own flex of political power. It seems imprudent. It seems immature. It seems wrong. And it seems like it's going to have some pretty heavy political consequences if the Senate actually moves forward with endorsing the House's actions. I think many of us see that as unlikely, but the Senate is still going to have a trial on the issue.
No, I do pray it's unlikely. One of the things that I want to bring up a little bit is some Republicans who voted to impeach say they didn't agree with all 20 articles of impeachment. I was trying to make sense of that, speak into that just a little bit.
Well, so I only know of one. David Cook from Arlington is one Republican who went in and basically said, I voted for the impeachment, but I would have voted against these 3 specific articles, right? I voted for these 17 articles. I would have voted against these 3, and here's my reasons for thinking those 3 are not good. He's the only one who did that. We did see a lot of Republicans come out and they tried to change the word impeach to proceed. We saw this was clearly a coordinated effort by Dade Phelan's leadership team that basically went to all these Republicans who likely went to them and said, I'm very uncomfortable with this. Everybody in my district's uncomfortable with this. It looks bad. We look bad. It stinks. And they said, hey, here's the good news. Instead of saying you voted to impeach, just say you voted to proceed to the next level. You didn't vote to impeach him. You just voted to proceed. You voted to send these articles to the Senate and let them decide. But that's not true. A vote to impeach is a vote to impeach. When Adam Kinzinger, when Liz Cheney voted to impeach President Trump, they didn't vote to proceed. They voted to impeach. And that's what these Republicans did. And then we saw further inconsistencies within that when you had Representative Jeff Leach out of Allen, Texas, Representative Briscoe Cain out of Baytown, put out these statements basically like, hey, we're just voting to proceed in the process. And then the next day, they're named on the prosecution team, right? So they start out by saying, hey, we're not impeaching the guy, not our thing. We don't have a lot of facts. It's been done very rushed. But we do think that this warrants proceeding to the Senate. And the next day, these guys are like, I'm on the prosecution team that's going to tell them why they should impeach. I think that goes to show that these Republican officials don't know why they're doing what they're doing. They're being given these talking points to kind of cover for their actions by House leadership.
Very, very concerning, Luke. No doubt, very concerning. So there are some liberals that are saying that there must be some truth to these accusations due to the conservatives in Ken Paxton's area who voted to impeach. What of that? I mean, is that what would you say to people, conservatives, strong conservatives who are scratching their head going, this might be true?
So ultimately, you have a long list of 20 different accusations, right? And one of the things that Representative John Smithy, I put this in my show. I've also posted this on my YouTube channel, Luke Macias. You can go and just watch Smithy's speech. There were many different speeches given against these articles. Representative Travis Clardy, who's one of the 5 most liberal Republicans, Representatives Tom Craddock and John Smithy, who are the 2 most senior Republican members. One of them's been there for almost 50 years, one for 40. These guys have been there almost 100 years between the 2 of them, both voting against impeachment. And then, of course, a consistent block of some of the most conservative lawmakers in the legislature all voting against it. Why did you have this eclectic coalition of individuals all saying no? I think that's a good question to ask in answer to why these Collin County reps stood up and did it. Ultimately, you have accusations that were made not based on facts. You had individuals that were interviewed and not sworn in. You had, these weren't affidavits. These weren't sworn comments from these individuals. This was, as Representative Smithy said, hearsay within hearsay within hearsay. It was an investigator who is a Democrat primary voter saying, hey, I sat down and interviewed an individual who wasn't sworn in, who that information couldn't be admitted in a court of law, but I talked to them and they said that this other person did this thing or said this thing. You have hearsay within hearsay within hearsay to build a case. So why would people step up and say, I'm going to vote based on what couldn't be admitted into a court of law? Well, the reason is is political motivation, also just where people are at. And then second, you kind of bring up the fact of what if some of these things are true? And I think that the way we would handle any accusations, if there was truth to them, is that is what we have a criminal justice system for, right? Some people criticized Governor Abbott during the shutdowns that were happening during COVID. And one of the positions was, look, even if you're somebody who thinks this shutdown should occur, you don't want it to occur with the stroke of a pen. You want it to occur with the force of law, with the legislative body. Here you have the legislative body saying, hey, we want to be the judge, jury, and executioner. We actually think that's the elected representatives. We're not here to make laws. We're here to be the entire criminal justice system. And we think that that's wrong. And if somebody says, I think some of these accusations could be true, we would say, then those should be prosecuted in the court of law where those things are handled, right? We don't want our state legislature to become a body that just looks around, finds anybody they don't like and says, hey, you know what? We think we can dig up an accusation of a crime you've committed and then decide to take political action against you based on that crime you've committed and bypass the entire justice system. I think that's the concern. So even when somebody says, hey, do you think some of these are true? The answer, I think, are two things. One, if it is true, the criminal justice system should handle it. But two, these accusations were made to all the voters of Texas. And that's the other thing that has to get acknowledged here, right? These accusations were made to the voters of Texas, and they chose Ken Paxton. And sometimes our elected elite, they just don't like what the people decide. They like that the people picked them, but they don't like some other people that people picked. And so now they're going to come in and say, it doesn't matter that y'all were told all these things. The voters they had millions of dollars of TV ads, text messages, digital ads, mailers saying Ken Paxton is a criminal and here's all the things he did. And they said, we think Ken Paxton's doing a good job. We're going to keep him as our attorney general. And then the elected leaders said, oh, crud, we gave you a chance to make the right decision. Now we're reversing that. I think that makes it very hard for somebody even who has previously voted in a conservative way to actually be someone who you can endorse their actions. And then the last thing I would say is conservatives conserve things, okay? And the reality is that what has happened with this impeachment has jeopardized an institution that at least on this issue has been prudent and thoughtful and mature in the way they've handled impeachments only twice since the foundations of Texas, right? So we are about to do the opposite of what conservatives do. We're going to be very progressive and liberal in the way we completely rewrite the entire impeachment process. I think it's dangerous. I think it undermines what this would become in the future of Texas.
I'm so glad you're bringing that up because I think that speaks to the conservatives, strong conservatives, that I think it's easy to get a little swayed by the pressure and the media and the things that are being said. But you're making these points that if we are not careful to make sure that due process is happening, it's for the sake of everyone, not just these political leaders, but for us as Texans, as Americans. And so that's very important. Bringing up a little bit, Ken Paxton's wife, Angela, she's a senator, and she will serve as a juror, but there's no word if she will recuse. What do you think about that? What will be happening with that?
So one thing that's important to note is that Angela Paxton's recusal doesn't, or lack thereof, doesn't change the voting situation on the floor of the Texas Senate. What I mean by that is they need 20 votes. If she's not there, they need 21 votes if she is there to convict. So, her vote literally cannot decide one way or the other. They still need the certain number of Republican senators. The recusal, there's a lot of accusations of recusals consistently. And I think one of the problems here is that what the Texas House has done is said, hey, we don't like who the voters sent to be their attorney general, so we're going to try to undo that election. And then they're saying, oh, by the way, we also don't like who the voters picked to be their state senator. We don't want her to have a voice either. Well, how convenient. How convenient that you get to try to undermine an election of the attorney general. Now you want to undermine the election of who they picked in Collin County to be their state senator. It's very unfortunate. So ultimately, I think Angela Paxton's the one who's going to decide what she's going to do. And the decision that she makes on whether to recuse or not recuse, I'm going to let rest in her judgment. She was elected by her voters. They sent her here to govern and make decisions on their behalf. That includes participating in any impeachment trials. And they knew when they elected her that her husband was the attorney general, and they decided to send her there anyway. So I think that's something to keep in mind when we look to her as far as what her decision is.
Very well said. So what can you leave our fellow Texans with to help us catch a breath in the midst of this chaos and in the midst of really wondering what will be the condition of Texas and the legal system, the political system, if we keep seeing these politicians get away with whatever they want to get away with? Is there anything we can do, Luke?
I think it's important to recognize some of the key victories we had this legislative session. We entered the session with Dade Phelan really not wanting to do a lot of very important things that we had to get to from a policy perspective. He had just finished a legislative session where he had killed a ban on genital mutilation surgeries on children and other things of that nature. We came into this session with a conservative coalition demanding some of these results, and then also a chairman of the Republican Party of Texas, and Matt Rinaldi, who said, I'm actually going to fight for these policy victories, and then a lieutenant governor and Dan Patrick that said, I'm going to pass them all quickly so the House looks even worse when they sit on them. And what that led to was the fact that we were able to get some strong victories with a ban on gender modification of children, the genital mutilation of Texas children, and also the blocking of their puberty, the application of cross-sex hormones. All of those things have been banned. Not all the social transitioning, which we do have to get to next session, but all of the surgeries and the physical things that are done to them. We were able to stop sexual drag shows, all of these sexual performances in the midst of our kids, which the Texas Family Project led the charge on. Huge victories on that side. We were able to get men out of women's sports and even some of the pornography out of our school libraries. These are some real victories that we had, and they weren't victories that were easy. It took a lot of conservatives showing up. We reined in liberal cities with this statewide preemption bill. Legislation that Dade Phelan killed as State Affairs Chair 2 sessions ago, we passed this time because Governor Abbott said he wanted it to happen. And Dade Phelan had stood in front and had been a block to so many of the governor's priorities that he just got out of the way this time, even though he had opposed this policy 4 years ago. That doesn't happen unless conservatives are organizing, unless they're pushing together, unless they're supporting a stronger Republican Party that's actually demanding these results. They're electing the right senators to put the pressure on the House. And even the House itself has gotten more conservative, not conservative enough, but more conservative. So these victories are being had. We're seeing actual tangible results, not enough. That's why we have to continue to fight. We got some serious health freedom reform that was in a really beneficial HB 44, which said that doctors who are literally denying their patients just because of their vaccine status, you didn't get the COVID shot, I'm not seeing you. Wow. Those doctors can no longer discriminate based on vaccine status with House Bill 44. Texans for Vaccine Choice pushed that through. Probably one of the biggest victories they've had on their single issue in the last 8 years that I've known of their existence. So I think those are important things to recognize are real victories that we had this session and things we should be grateful that happens. And so when we look at all the bad stuff happening, we say, hey, that needs to not happen again. Here's what I'm going to do to make sure that doesn't happen. But we shouldn't say, oh, well, we never get anything. We don't ever win. We can't ever get things that, because there are children whose lives would be permanently altered later this year that won't be altered. There are families that are trying to sexualize their kids, and the only thing they feel comfortable doing is leaving the state of Texas, moving, which, by the way, we can't stop a family from moving, but that's what we literally need to build. We need to build a society where if you want to mutilate the genitals of your child, you shouldn't feel welcome in Texas. You shouldn't feel like you can live in Texas. You shouldn't feel like your family is safe because your family is a family of abusers. And so we have gotten some key victories where we say, hey, if you walk into a drag show with your child, he's 3 years old, and you're going to let somebody dance sexually in front of them, mostly naked, that's going to come with a penalty. That is going to come with the full force of the law. And that wouldn't have happened 6 months ago. So good victories. Yeah. I think those are what should motivate us to continue. To say, if my Republican official clearly is not listening to me enough, not ever, but enough, fight for somebody new. Fight to help somebody replace them that will give us even more victories next time around.
I love your perspective. Thank you for bringing such a powerful, positive perspective, because I can tell you, as a woman of faith, and I know you're a man of faith,
yes,
sometimes you get overwhelmed with watching all the things going on in our state and in our nation. And so I love what you just presented. Stay focused on the victories. I think that's a powerful word. It's definitely wrapped around faith, no doubt. So how can people find you, Luke? I want people to make sure they connect with you, that they become the most educated Texan here. So how can they find you?
Well, I appreciate that. You can go to LukeMacias.com if you want my weekly emails. The Luke Macias Show, Teresa Lusk Show. I like our original thought process and our show names, but you can go to the Luke Macias Show. It's on all the podcast platforms. It's on YouTube. If you want to watch it, if you want to listen to it, you can. We try to come once or twice a week. We're going back to once a week outside of legislative session. I'll have a couple of intermittent episodes as special sessions occur, and there's some more commentary. But normally it's just once a week that we come to everybody and try to give them that information. You can follow me on Twitter, on Facebook. I'm on all the platforms. Luke Macias, not hard to find. Yeah, and I've enjoyed the last several years of being able to take certain people that I know that 3 years ago weren't doing anything, and then through the show, we're able to know what was going on and then try to get plugged in to other efforts. And I know a lot of people are doing that through your program as well, so I'm grateful for what you're doing.
Thank you. I can't wait to have you back on so that you can continue to inform and build up Texas so that we know exactly what's going on. Luke, you've been a blessing today. Thank you so much for joining the Teresa Lusk Show. And there you have it, my friends. Please make sure you go find Luke Macias. I personally watch this man's shows. I personally watch the information, listen. It's very educational. You are in a very important season of your life. If you care about the direction of your state and the direction of your nation. So go out there, find him, follow him, and make sure you become the most educated Texan there is today. God bless you. Thank you once again, Luke. Have a great one.
Thank you.